today's episode of Vice Versa, we're talking about SpaceX successfully landing the Starship at the same time that the Starlink pre-orders are soaring, Tesla's buying patents for just $3, Arrival and Uber announce a ride-hailing car, and details on Tesla's new Powerwall Plus, and more. And as usual, I'm joined by the guy who's driving around California in his ID4, Ricky Roy. How you doing, Ricky?
I made it. I'm at mom and dad's house. We had the opportunity to have an ID4, as you mentioned, for a week. And should I just start with how that's gone?
Yeah, I'd love to hear how it's going.
So the ID4 has a little less range than my Model 3. It has like 200 and something. And I find that the range calculations, the projections on the map, all that is just less accurate than on the Tesla. The Tesla's pretty bulletproof. You go up a hill, you come down a hill, and it tells you where you're going to be, and it's pretty good about it. So the ID4, not so much. So on our 450-mile trip, our final charging stop, we pull into the charging station that the car told us to. It's about midnight now. It was a late night. And so the ID4 said, yeah, pull over here, on your way, charge here at this station. The station wasn't open yet. And we were out of luck. And we had 30 miles of range. So the two options were to go back 35 miles back to the previous nearest station, or to go forward 40 miles. We freaked out, called my parents. My dad was like on standby. He's like, all right, I'll come get you. But even if you did, what do you do with the car, right?
Yeah.
So we braved it. We drafted behind a semi at like 55 miles an hour, and we made it to the previous stop. So we backtracked 35 miles, charged for an hour and 40 minutes because the station there was a 50 kilowatt charger, and then turned back around and got home around 3:30. All in. It was the worst road trip I've ever had, for sure. To be fair, EA is growing. Hopefully it gets better, but the integration between car and station where you're going has to improve. Like there's
Yeah.
no way you could reliably do a road trip right now, I think, with the VW.
Not a good
How
introduction
about
to
you?
VW. My week was not that exciting. It's been just a kind of a normal week for me. Yeah. What you also put a new
So what
video out
videos
this
did you have
week.
this week?
I was gonna say you put a new video out on the microfactory stuff, and if everybody should go watch that because he and I have both talked to Arrival, who's doing the microfactory technique versus the gigafactory, and he does a wonderful like teardown of the differences between the two systems. It's definitely worth watching.
Yeah, that was our video last week. Tomorrow we have a video coming out on why we haven't been back to the moon, or when we actually will now, which is going to be pretty exciting, I think. What
hmm
about you? What was your video this week?
It was on. Actually, I'm blanking what it was on because I'm working so many videos ahead. It was the 3D printing homes. That's what it was. Yeah, it was something I stumbled upon like I don't know a couple months ago, and just like I went down a rabbit hole of this is insane. Just 3D printing houses, and it's cheaper and takes less labor to put them together. It's still just very early days, but there's several companies that are doing it. That it's kind of mind blowing what you can do.
Yeah, that's the future I'm looking forward to. That should be fun. So we'll have descriptions, videos to those, links to those videos in description. But let's get started with our very first story. And Matt mentioned before we started, this has kind of been like the week of SpaceX, and I think that's right. The SN15 prototype high altitude flight test was successful, which is fantastic. People have been talking about how, they've been crashing these things, and I think people have the wrong idea that, any crash is bad. It's quite the opposite. They've learned a ton, and they were able to figure out exactly what they should be doing, and as a result now, they've got a successful landing maneuver. And I think what's interesting here is for the first time in kind of human space flight, this rocket now has to be safe, and we have to go through like a post-flight process and, actually go through and safe it, if you will, safing, which is, this is a rocket that was just lit a little while ago. Are all systems deactivated? Are all the tanks emptied? Is it actually safe? Because you remember that I think it was SN10 had a crash. Sorry, it landed awkwardly, albeit, but it did land, and then it kind of caught fire a couple of minutes later. So knowing that in the back of your mind, if you're SpaceX and this landed, how long do you wait before you go and actually safe it? Which is a, a good question. So that was the final part of this, and this will be the key because if this is going to be our future, and we're going to have craft like this that take off and come back to Earth, we will have to have a system upon which we can reliably and predictably prepare them for their future launches. So, bravo, SpaceX. This is unbelievably cool stuff. And I think this marks the beginning of the next set of trials, eventually resulting in the lunar lander that they were contracted to build.
Yeah,
Pretty amazing, right, Matt? What do you think?
this had me so excited today when this came out, when this happened. It's just like this is such a milestone. And yes, it was on fire when it was after it landed. So there's still kinks they have to work out, but that's part of the process. It's really fascinating how the other companies in the field are all kind of working behind closed doors, and SpaceX is being very open with all of their tests. So we're getting to see how the sausage is made with each one of these tests, and each one is just better than the last. And that landing, oh, that is so amazing. This is a major kind of milestone that should get everybody excited.
Yeah, this it almost looks fake, doesn't it? Because of
Yeah,
the nozzle vectoring for the rocket engines, which is really like a fighter aircraft technology, and it makes it look fake. It looks like, "Man, how can it possibly be moving in the sky?" That's just incredible. This is going to be one of the things that I think we as humanity have to look forward to. Will be this really fast cycle prototyping and development of rockets, which maybe now the next 10 years will be full of instead of going to the moon and then ignoring it altogether.
yeah, agreed.
And in a yeah, and in a connected story, we also have not to be outdone by Starship, Falcon 9, which is SpaceX's bread and butter, and it's their production rocket system right now, has launched another set of satellites for the for Starlink. This is the 25th operational launch, and now they're poised to increase their user base and to continue to roll this out to more customers. They currently have about 10,000 active users, and the most interesting part about this entire article is that they kind of unveiled or showed, and they kind of showed their hand that they have about 500,000, pre-subscribers that are ready to jump on as soon as it's available in their area. So demand is there. Now they just have to execute and actually roll this out. And I've been watching a ton of YouTube videos on performance, and it has shockingly been pretty great. Um, I think Nikki and her team at Transport Evolve actually operate on Starlink.
That's
She
incredible.
has a video where she has a video where she says, "Being brought to you by Starlink." So, a great week for just SpaceX in general, for Elon and the entire community. But
Yeah.
yeah,
The
stuff's
Starlink
happening.
stuff, it's like they have 1,500 satellites in orbit right now, and they're not slowing down. They're still going, which is just, it's going to get faster and more reliable the more they put up there. The other thing that's interesting about that 500,000, if you just do the math, that's something like, I think it was like that'd be $50 million of revenue a month, or basically $600 million a year. And that's just from the 500,000 people waiting to get it. It's like, imagine where they're going to be in 5 years. It's like you're going to have millions of people. This is going to be a multi-billion-dollar business, which is why you can understand why they're talking about potentially spinning it off as its own business. But it's just going to get bigger and bigger and faster. It's just it's like a juggernaut that's like starting to wake up. It's like this just, it's going to be fantastic to watch it unfold. But just the fact that there's $600 million of revenue basically lined up already, that's astonishing.
Truly, truly is. The couple of challenges that they'll have is scaling up. As you have more users, you're going to have more satellites. This
Yep.
data has to get processed and distributed from somewhere. So um, on land, on Earth, it's pretty cheap to do that. You build another tower or you build another data center, but this is space. But guess who's in the business of making space flights cheaper and cheaper? SpaceX. So they're incredibly well poised for this. And the second thing is, I was reading, and I don't know if you know this off the top of your head, but these Starlink satellites have a lifespan of, I'm going to say like between 5 and 8 years or something like that.
Hmm.
And they have to eventually be replaced. So there is some capex there. Like this is not going to just, it's not like a passive income stream. Like they're going to have to be on top of it. But
Yep.
who's to say that if they're selling this for $100 a month is maybe the low end. Maybe they can go even higher in Western or more developed countries, but the potential here is huge.
Yeah.
And that's why I think a lot of people are waiting for that IPO. I know I am.
Yeah. Me too. All right. So next story, if we're ready to jump to it. So
Let's do it.
Tesla snaps up a battery patents. There were several of them they bought for $3. And this news that came out, it made me laugh because it happened earlier in the year when they had their battery day. Drew Buglino talked about their cathode process, where I loved how they described this. It was like in the raw materials input phase, they do the metal, create metal sulfates, and they put chemicals with it. And then there's the cathode production process, and that's the red bar in that image that he just described as a bunch of stuff happens, and then the final result is a lot of wastewater. The process ends up creating about 4,000 gallons of wastewater that contains things like ammonia, metal particles, and toxic chemicals. And so what they announced was they had a new process that's going to basically remove all that wastewater because the wastewater can be either doesn't exist, and what it does exist, the chemicals can be kind of recirculated to be used again. So it's going to save money. It's going to be safer and more environmentally friendly. It turns out that was part of the patents that they bought from a company that was called Spring Power International, which is a very, very small company that nobody had heard of. And Tesla apparently kind of did an acqui-hire because they bought the patents for $3. And then over the course of the past several months, a bunch of their employees have been changing their LinkedIn profiles to Tesla. So there you go.
Yeah.
This story just really caught my eye because it's like, this is not the first time that Tesla's done this, where it's like we find out 6 months later that they snapped up some small company for who knows what kind of deal, because it was all in the background, nobody talked about it, and suddenly they have all this influx of new talent in the company, helping them do something kind of crazy. This one to me is it's little details like that from Battery Day that show how they're rethinking the entire manufacturing process, where it's not necessarily like some big glitzy new like solid state battery that has no, it's like a lithium battery. It's straight up optimizing how you create the battery and being as optimized as you can, which is going to save resources. It's going to save money. It's going to be safer for the environment. It's just, I love this story. And I also want to know more about this company now and the people that ended up there. So what was your take on the story?
Yeah, it's awesome too because I think some of these kinds of initiatives really help in places like Nevada, for example, where the Gigafactory is now, where we have very desert climate. Water usage is always an issue, and I think we're entering another little drought season the next couple of years here in California and Nevada. So really important. And it just goes back to how Tesla seems to just rethink things that most people just take as gospel. We this is how we do things. This is how batteries are created. We don't we only get it involved at this stage, and from here on, we'll try to see if we can optimize. But Tesla goes back to the beginning. Remember the clay, getting lithium out of lithium clays and stuff, and there in Nevada. Clearly, because that's where they are, then that's where they they want to tackle it. So I just think it's fascinating. That approach to how they do stuff is starting to show for me as I get more like perspective on other non-Tesla EVs. Right? We talked about this before. The ID.4 is a great vehicle. All the vehicle stuff about it is fantastic, right? The wind noise and the road noise is really good. The comfort, the chassis and the tuning suspension is all fantastic. It's a really good car. But the software part, the integration with how you charge, the user experience of it is very flawed and has a long way to go.
Hmm.
And so is the Bolt, and so is every other auto manufacturer, right? But Tesla came out with their first product and has like the coolest UI of anything in any car. So it just goes to show you that sometimes you got to just throw out the playbook and start over. So I would love to know more details, and like you said, then stuff happens here and a bunch
Yeah.
of junk gets thrown out here. I'd love to know more
Yeah.
than that. We're working on some videos in the future about recycling batteries, and I've learned a little bit of insight from making those or researching those about how the sulfates are kind of the input for raw materials, just the most stable form of some of these chemicals and elements and stuff. But bravo for rethinking it. And they don't really get into the details of just how much like cost is saved, but whenever you optimize stuff for any purpose. It's going to eventually lead in higher yields and stuff. So
Right.
this is this is Tesla's game plan. I think everyone is starting to get it. It's not just about, oh, we can copy their cars or we can copy this model. What you got to copy is their obsessiveness to reimagine everything. And I don't think anybody's doing it like they are.
You gotta do the first principles thinking approach on everything. You have to come at it fresh. It's like if you mimic that, you'll probably end up in a similar position to Tesla, but other companies aren't doing it yet, which is kind of sad. So you ready for the next
Yeah,
one?
I think yeah, they're more worried about the short term, but
Yeah.
they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Speaking of companies that are thinking about doing cool
Yeah,
stuff,
exactly.
the next story is about Arrival and Uber working together on an electric ride-hailing car. This story I think is interesting, and I was really glad Matt put it on the board this week because we mentioned we did a video on Arrival where they're kind of rethinking how you build cars. And their approach is, well, rather than spending like $1 billion in a factory in the hope that we can build 100,000 or a couple 100,000 of these cars, what if we scale everything back? What if we can make 10,000 cars or 10,000 vehicles a year? Could we do it at a good price point and could we do it profitably? So that's what kind of that microfactory concept was. And one of my takeaways in that video, and here's some pictures, it's really cool looking, am I right?
Yeah, no, it's very,
Has a
very
really
sleek and modern looking.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, very cool vibe. So one of my takeaways from that video was if you look at the Arrival van, it was clearly very modular. The body panels were kind of identical, and you just copied and pasted them based on how many you needed for the length of the vehicle. So this type of microfactory approach might not work for a car like the Tesla Model S or the Lucid Air, where they're really beautiful and a lot of curves and but for a car like this, where it's really about interior volume, and we get to the exterior of this car, but I imagine they're following the same methodology there. Also, they don't use stamping machines like typical factories do. Instead, what they do is they use this um, thermoplastic composite that they form into different molds. And so these panels, instead of being sheet metal, which is what our cars would be a thermoplastic composite material. The cool thing with that is they're very ding proof. So you get a couple of dings, or you hit something as you're driving around these cars autonomously, right? Um, these eventually autonomously. They're going to take damage, and now with this sort of material, you're going to be able to absorb it. And last point for Uber, it's really valuable because I think Uber is seeing that when as soon as Tesla has self-driving, they're not going to go call Uber and go, "Hey Uber, how do you feel about being the broker to connect us with people?" They're not going to do that. They know Tesla's going to build that themselves. So they're starting to maybe think we have to be both car and provider. So this makes sense for them to partner with somebody who can bring that to market.
Yeah. To build on that, though, I think one of the things of Rival's approach is they're not trying to be a GM or a Ford pumping out 20 million cars, by themselves. It's they're working in smaller markets. Like they're starting with delivery vans for like UPS and buses for cities, and now these ride sharing cars, which are not going to be they're not going to probably sell a million of these every year because it's not a consumer level vehicle. So they'll be selling smaller numbers of these, which makes a lot more sense for a microfactory that might only be putting out a couple thousand a year. And if you have a few of these microfactories around pumping them out, you could put out, 10, 20,000 cars, and that's all that's needed for that market. So you don't need to be the GM scale of producing millions of cars. The other side of it is Uber, like you mentioned, they've made an announcement that I think it was by 2025 they wanted to be all electric, and they've kind of bandied about in this area with talking with pseudo partnerships with people. But this is the first one where they're coming out with like, no, this is a car that's actually going to be on the road that will actually incentivize to try to help people buy them, because they're actually going to have some kind of EV program where they're going to offer incentives for their drivers to buy cars like this, which is really interesting. I'm curious to see how that actually plays out, because that seems odd that they're going to kind of fund buying EVs like this. But if they want to hit that 2025 goal of being 100% electric, they're going to have to do stuff like that. There's no other way around it. And the one part about this whole story that's not there is the autonomy. It's like that there's a big hand wave on this. This is all electric, but you still have human drivers. where's the autonomy? When is that coming? That's
Yeah,
the part of it I
I
would
kind
love
of
to know
think
about.
I kind of think Uber might be working on some stuff kind of behind the scenes, and
Yeah,
they're like, we'll deal with that. Arrival, we don't want to make cars. You do that. And Arrival's thinking, great, because we don't want to tackle computer vision and self-driving. So that's probably why the partnership is going to be a good one.
right.
But you make a very good point. Going electric makes sense. And I've always mentioned like if you were going to build a perfect ride-hailing car, it wouldn't look like the cars that you and I see day to day. It would
No,
be purpose-built for that. I mean, that's we don't use pickup trucks for transporting huge materials and stuff. We have custom
yeah.
vehicles for that. So
Like this, the front passenger seat folds down and goes away so that you can have extra leg room. So it's like it does things. A bench seat in the back so that you can slide in and out like a taxi. So it's stuff that you don't see in a car that we're buying. It's custom tailored for this purpose, which is going to be nice.
exactly. Last
So
story.
the next story is we're going back to the Tesla Powerwall. We've been talking about the Powerwall. I think it's like this is the third week in a row that we've talked about this, but it's back in the news again. The specs came out for the new Powerwall Plus. And this is the first real update to the Powerwall that we've seen in, I think it's like 5 or 6 years. I think it was 2015 or 16 was it was 2016 was the last update. And the last news story we talked about was there was a software update that was coming out for existing Powerwall owners that was increasing the power output of the units, which is great news. But what this one is, it's an update to the hardware itself. And what's interesting is they've streamlined it so it's integrating it with the battery with the inverter system and the system controller, which so that the solar panel system, the inverter, all that stuff, it's all integrated into one kind of thing, as you can see right here. Because above the battery right here is the inverter, and then the battery is right here. This is going to streamline the installation process. This is what Elon was talking on the call, the last quarter of the call, is it streamlines the installation process, should make it cheaper and easier to do. It should require less requirements from local utilities. I'm curious on that one because I think that's going to be a regional thing. I don't think that's going to be across the board thing, but it should, in theory, make it easier to get install faster. But this one, I was a little perplexed why they would force solar buyers to get the Powerwall because they're forcing people to buy them together now. After this came out, it starts to get a little more clear. I still have concerns because it does still jack up the overall cost of going solar with Tesla because batteries are still very expensive. But the other thing about this is the specs, which I think the specs are a little lower on the screen. In case you don't know, the Powerwall, this has not changed the actual storage capacity. It only changes the power output capacity. So it ups it to about 9 kilowatts for maximum output if you're off grid. And if you're on grid power, it's like 7.6, I think, kilowatts. That just means that you can have things like your air conditioning system running, stove running, things like that when the power goes out, and a single Powerwall can handle more of that at once, which is a really, really good thing. Like, for instance, I have one Powerwall at my house, and I would have to be careful what I'm running because I could easily trip over that 5 kilowatts that my system currently can support. And this can go up to 7.6 off of grid power. So this is going to help with that. And the other big thing that they integrated was a something called a soft start, which is it helps to avoid those big spikes that happen when your HVAC system kicks on. And having that integrated and built in too is really smart because I've actually been thinking of having one of those installed on my house to help with my HVAC system. And the fact that this is integrated, super smart. What's your take on this?
Yeah, I thought it was a really, really cool move on their part. I do have a couple of concerns. I guess I'll start there because I mean I think you did a good job of outlining the cool stuff, the reason why
Yeah,
we should be excited. One is they mentioned that you have to get their solar with their batteries. Like you
yep,
can't go, hey Tesla, I got a quote, I got this other guy coming for solar, and just give me a Powerwall. Like they say they won't work. And there was no reason why that would be the case. I mean, solar panels put out DC voltage. They're pretty standardized. I don't think they were talking about the solar glass roof either. This is just traditional panels. So
Correct.
this feels like a move to the Apple world where you don't mix and match. You get the Tesla product and you get the Tesla product. You bring them together. It does make sense in terms of cost because the Powerwall is expensive currently, and part of it is really labor intensive. And the big reason why they upped the output to 7 to 9 kilowatts is, like you mentioned, if you don't do that, in the case of you and I, you have to build a critical loads panel. So you're taking the main electrical panel and you are taking half of the circuits out and moving them over the lower loads to this backup panel. And the Powerwall can only have to connect to that. That is a huge amount of work. I mean, it took like a day and a half, almost 2 days for them to finish that on my house. Because you're taking all the circuits that could come into your house and you're moving them over. With this now, that's all gone. You notice in that picture, you have your main panel and then there you have a Powerwall. Because now your whole panel is the backup panel. There's no secondary backup option. And that was needed back in the day because at 5,000 kilowatts, you can't back up things, as you mentioned, like your air conditioning, especially that spike, as you mentioned.
Hmm.
So this removes all that labor. Like I'm thinking about at my house, if I had got this installed, they're done like late day one. There's no day two. So I think the cost savings there can be pretty huge. I don't know if they're going to reflect on the prices or if there's other
That's my
considerations there.
question. It's like, it's going to save money. Save money for who? Tesla or the end user? It's like, that's my big question because I don't see them dropping prices yet. So they're going to, if they follow the Apple path, they'll keep that price consistent forever, even though they increase their profit margin. That's what they'll end up doing if they go that path.
Which I think that's okay, right? If you can be an investor on the investment side and be happy with that, but because there's demand, right? There's a ton of
Yeah.
people who want Powerwalls, so I don't think they need to drop prices. And I wouldn't be surprised if currently I think it's like $2,500 is what they tell you it'll cost for installation. I wouldn't be surprised if that comes down quite a bit.
It would be nice if it did.
It looks cooler too. Doesn't it look way cooler with just kind of
Clean,
the minimalistic?
very clean, which is not
So
how
the
my
top,
installation looks.
agreed. So the top part is the inverter. What about that gateway? Is the gateway built into the Powerwall now?
It sounds
Like
like
the
the gateway's
brains?
it sounds like the gateway's all built in. So it's like it sounds like this is a completely streamlined approach, which could explain why it's bundled with their stuff now. You have to get the solar from them because it's so integrated. Where the gateway makes it agnostic. You can go with any system you want because the gateway just
Right.
handles all that kind of stuff. So it's like I wonder if that's partly why they did this. Because that's another thing that you have to pay for right now. You get a Powerwall, you have to get the gateway, which costs, I think it was like $1,500 or something like that, or $2,000 just for the gateway.
Right.
And so it's like if you get rid of that, there's a cost that's gone. A shared inverter between this panel system and the battery. So it's like I could see why they might want to do that.
It's a If you think about like the full picture now of Tesla Solar, we both did videos maybe almost exactly a year ago where they announced the cheapest prices on the market, right? It
Yep.
was kind of a play to get into markets and start to kind of saturate um, installations. Then now they swing wildly the other direction and mention no more cells without power walls. And I actually think where they're headed today is long term the better approach. I've mentioned in the past that people who get solar in California are not doing Californians any favors because they're actually causing huge spikes of production during peak times and as a result, power operators are really struggling with that. So I would say if you got a smaller solar system and you got a power wall, maybe it's not enough to eat up your entire bill, but if you could have more of a steady load draw from the grid
Yeah.
and everyone did that, that's way better. So long term, this is probably the right move, but it does make Tesla maybe a little less price competitive, especially because the average person is thinking, well, Powerwall is not going to save me money. It's backup. Why would I want to get more solar panels and have more? It's a little tricky, but I do think Tesla's doing the right thing for sure.
I do too. It's just they're pricing themselves out of the market for a huge swath of the country here in
Ten
the United
thousand
States.
dollars
It's
for
significant. It's
not
like it's
solar, right?
and batteries in certain areas are not going to make sense. It's not going to make sense. The electricity already is too cheap. There's no time of use rates. It's like getting your money back out of that is not going to exist. And so for those areas, Tesla's probably going to just see their sales plummet.
Play though could be, well, the gateway's built in. This is an internet device. They build into their auto bidder system, and you don't even know about it. You just live your life, and your Powerwall is buying and selling electricity like some stockbroker
Oh,
on on Wall Street.
it, in the long term, I agree. That's what's going to happen. It's like I agree in the long term. This is the smart play. This is where it has to kind of go. I just fear that they're pushing the envelope too far because the prices aren't quite there yet, unless we see them start to drop their solar prices significantly over the next couple of years. It's like, I think if that happens, then I don't think there's gonna be a big issue. But long term, this is the way to go. And they're creating their own massive virtual power plant system for every single one of these they install. It's another battery added to their power plant system, which
Right.
is that's going to be money in the bank in the long run for them. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and it might not matter a whole lot because they're kind of constrained in terms of Powerwall output anyway.
Yeah,
So if this is driving away some customers in the early days while there's a shortage, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world.
true, very true. So we did have one more story. Do we want to do that last story, or do we want to go to Q&A?
Let's jump to the Q&A.
All right. So that was the last story of the evening. Jump into the questions. We'll start skimming through the comments to see what people have been talking about.
Long Hollywood says the inverter is not even needed as the Powerwall is getting DC from the panels, and so it can just charge directly. Um, is it taking the DC from the battery and converting it to AC for the house?
Yes. It does need the inverter because it needs the inverter to get the electricity into the house. But between the panels and the battery, it could just stay DC. But the inverter's needed to get it into the house. So they both share that one inverter.
This is a good question. Nano says, do you think NASA will let astronauts fly on a crewed Starship without an abort system?
Oh boy. That's a good question.
I'm gonna say no.
Yeah. They're very conservative for very good reason. But at the same time though, it's like if the space flight becomes like getting on a plane, if it turns into the point where it's like as safe as getting on an airplane, those kind of restrictions would probably start to lighten up. But we're
Right.
a long way away from that.
Elon on SNL. I think that's on this Saturday, correct?
It's this Saturday. How do you feel about that? Because he is, I'm socially awkward, but Elon makes me look like the most suave guy in the universe. He is so socially awkward. I love the guy, but man, I'm nervous for him of how he's gonna come across if it comes off well. The fact it is going to be rehearsed, it's not going to be done cold. I think it's going to help him, but he's not a performer, and so it's like I hope it's not like a Curb Your Enthusiasm episode for me, because it's like that's going to be like unwatchable for me. I can't watch things like that because I have too much empathy and I feel too much pain for him. So it's like I don't know if I'll be able to watch it. What about you?
I think he's gonna be funny. He has his own little
Yeah,
quirky way of being funny that I always have enjoyed, and I'm sure he has. I know he's not in favor of PR people, but I'm sure he's got a team coming up with good content for him to cover. So
well,
I
the writers are good on SNL, so it's like
right.
if they lean into his personality and his sense of humor, it's like I think they can nail it. But it's like if they don't find that gel with him, it's just going to come across as awkward. So I'm hoping that they lean into his sense of humor.
Yeah, there's going to be some jokes about him being richer than Jeff Bezos or something about the feuds with Bill
Yes.
Gates and stuff.
Yes.
There's gonna be some fun with basically being like the galactic emperor of Earth at this point, and all the memes and stuff. I'm looking forward to it. I haven't watched SNL in a while. Not really. Since college, I just don't have as much time, and I'll watch this one for sure.
Uh, Karamo asked me, "Do you use selected services with EverSource? Could you be more specific? 'Cause I don't know if I use selective services with EverSource. I'm part of Connected Solutions, and I have my Ecobee linked up with them. So it's like, if that's what you're talking about, then yes.
Big thanks to Eric Kessler for the super chat.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you,
Eric, as
Eric.
always.
Thanks.
This is a good question. I'm actually curious, Matt. It says, Matt, have you ever done any testing on bifacial solar panels,
I've never done any
like
testing on
signature
them,
solar?
but I've talked to a bunch of people in the industry about them, the differences of installation, how they work. It adds a nominal amount of extra power. It's not like it doubles how much energy you get, but it adds like 20% or something like that, 25% to production, because it's basically just getting the reflection of sunlight that comes bouncing off the ground and the ambient light from the backside. So it's only adding on an additional like 20, 25%, which if you're talking about you're building on a massive solar array farm, like down in Texas, there's 1.2 million solar panels in a solar farm run by NL, and those are all bifacial panels. So it's like they're getting the
Interesting.
benefit of the light coming through and then bouncing back. So they're just
One
maximizing
cool,
everything they get.
right, one cool application would be the carport. So
Yes.
there's just more, I mean, it's not like you're so close to the roof. It's a little carport, maybe
Yeah.
kind of a different approach, a different way to do it.
Having a
A
gap.
big thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Big shout out to Bill O'Barr for the super chat. Um, Bill asks, Ricky, how many times did you have to charge on your trip? So again, the I could watch on the screen as the number of times I would have to charge. It would like jump back and forth between one and two. And the reason why is because as I was going 80 miles an hour, basically the projections of range are just wildly like it feels like they're averaging too much of like the last couple of miles and not enough of the last 50 miles. So my Tesla, what I've noticed is like I always feel like, oh, I have this huge hill coming up, I'm not going to make it. But if you look at the range, look at what the map tells you, it is always right. It knows what to do. Here, that was not the case. So as I was driving faster, it would start to show me that I need an additional stop. And then eventually I slowed down and it would go away. But the answer is three times. I had to charge three times. The first was about 45 minutes, which was okay because we took a break and had dinner. The second was a 30-minute really fast charging because it was a 350 kilowatt charger and we were getting a peak about 120. So we got up to about 80% in 30 minutes. And I figured we'll do the same thing again one last time. But I didn't realize is that the last one would be a 50 kilowatt charger and I'd be there for an hour and a half. So
Hmm.
three times.
And Karamo said to me, it was the Connected Solutions program that on my utility, and I am part of that. So it's like my Powerwall is part of the system, so it participates in the program. I'll get payouts. I think it's twice a year from that, or once a year maybe. And then my Ecobee is on it as well. So like if there's spike events in the middle of the summer, they'll actually turn my temperature down to help avoid a burden on the grid. And I agree, James. Ricky does look way too comfy right now.
Somebody else said, Ricky looks like I'm I'll find it here. Let's see. Something about how low the quality is. I'm on Wi-Fi, which is the problem.
Yeah.
So this is a pretty good question. Eric says, will the new Powerwall support input power feed from a generator on a long grid down event? So imagine the sun goes down and you've got like a little diesel generator off the side. Could you feed that back in? You know, when you get this installed, I would talk to an electrician and bring these kinds of questions up. Some of the stuff it's not really about being possible or not. It's just a matter of wiring it up to make
Yeah.
it possible.
Yeah, I do know that there are people that have diesel generators as a backup to their battery backup. So if they ran out of battery backup, they could just kick their diesel generator on in an emergency. Um, so it is possible. I don't know if Tesla would be happy about that, but you can do it.
One thing I've toyed with the idea, I haven't done anything about it. I would love to be able to charge my Powerwall during like my super off-peak period. So like midnight comes around and charge it all up. Because right now, charging the sun is up, but that sunshine energy I could be selling for a higher price
Yeah.
with with a full Powerwall. So not a huge amount of money difference, but it would be cool to know that I could do that. The comment I was looking at was from Jonathan. He says, Ricky, are you using Starlink on potato can?
Oh man.
I am not, but actually that might have been better quality.
Ah, interesting. Bong Hollywood brought up a good point. They have said that the Powerwall Plus is going to only be powered exclusively by the solar. So it's not going to be powered by the grid. It's only the solar. So it the way it works is changing. So that's another thing to consider.
Yeah, so that makes it sound like the DC just goes directly to the
To,
battery, and there's no way to take AC into the battery. So okay.
correct.
Bong Hollywood says, Ricky, you can do it once you get the Hyundai Ioniq 5. I believe that one charges really quickly. I think it has 300 miles of range, if I'm not mistaken. I'd love to know. I think Electrify America has a long way to go, generally. My first charge stop had issues. I had to move my car to another spot. The second time it was pretty smooth. It just needs a little bit of finessing. I think it has a couple of years to really mature, whereas Tesla's stage network just feels more polished. They've been doing this for a little bit longer, so eventually, as good as a car is, Bong, I'm curious. They're also going to go with EA, I think, right? So that has to be there too.
James asked me earlier if I've gotten a quote for solar and Powerwalls yet for my layer yet. it's it's still way too early for that, but I did do some pricing on looking at what it would cost potentially for a solar roof versus solar panels from Tesla. So I have a ballpark idea of how much it'll cost, but it's still way too early.
It says, do you think Cybertruck will have a 200 kilowatt hour battery pack? It might make a really good home battery. 500 miles of range. You figure it'll be, yeah, I think 200 kilowatt hours is a good approximation. That's it. But the only problem is, will they support vehicle to grid? So that's the question I think that we have to figure out.
They've never talked positively about that. They've always just dodged it. So I don't think it will, but hope I'm wrong.
My wife says two more likes to 100. Come on,
Yeah,
somebody
hit that like
hit the
button.
like button.
We've got 200 people in here. Come on. The Onyx
You know,
5.
on
What were we going to say? Go ahead.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
I was just going to bring up this comment. Ionic 5 on the 800 volt is supposed to charge in to 10 to 80% in 16 to 18 minutes. That's fast. That's awesome.
So, Christian, I'm curious if that is on the Electrify America 350 kilowatt standard.
It probably is.
Yeah. So, and this is the function of the car. This isn't Electrify America, but I was getting about 120, which I think is the cap for the ID4. So we need either the Lucid Air or one of these cars that can charge at that crazy rate to come out to prove that. Because until then, it feels very theoretical. I was just gonna say, Matt and I are very pro other EVs. We always try to give non-Teslas a chance. Like we want them to do well. I want more electric vehicle buying options in the market. And then you drive one and you realize all the people who say Tesla's way ahead. I think you're right. Like Tesla is way ahead.
Yes, they are.
That is a fact. But it doesn't remove the fact that we do need other people to figure this out eventually. So if the ID4 and these other cars that are coming out right now allow them to transition to the next generation of their stuff, then bring it on as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I applaud the Ford Mustang Mach-E's, the Ioniq 5s, the ID4s. It's like I am excited for every single one of these EVs that hits the market, and I want them all to succeed because it's better for all of us. Like Cybertruck 2022 special edition with Starship scraps. I would buy that. If I could buy a Cybertruck that is made with leftover parts from something that went to space, I would buy that.
Sign me up. Yeah.
Yes.
So, Dusty Green says, do they test cycle the battery at these high charge rates? I think he's talking about the Powerwall. And this actually gets to what we talked about, I think it was last week, Matt. They were doing an over-the-air upgrade to increase that output to
Mhm.
9 kilowatts or 7 kilowatts, which means that they were getting analytics data off of all of these different devices remotely and able to make this call. So I'm thinking, okay, what if we support 5 kilowatts and we wait a year, we get data for a year, and we see, how high can it charge to, how low can it charge to, what kind of output does it have, and then compare it over a year. Oh wow, it's way exceeding our expectations. Cool, no problem. Or temperatures to charge and discharge, how hot is it getting?
Mhm.
And they're monitoring all this stuff, making engineering decisions remotely from somewhere, and then rolling out updates. It's an incredible way of doing business. I don't think I've ever heard of a company doing stuff like that. So, um,
And the fact
yeah,
that
they do some kind of testing.
the current most recent Powerwall 2s will get somewhat close to these new Powerwall Pluses just from the software update. It's like it shows that they probably haven't significantly changed the Powerwall itself. It's just the optimizing of the inverters and the gateways and the way it's all packaged together. But the internals are just pretty much probably what they were before. So it's good hardware, just lots of analytics data, learnings, and software tweaks allows them to do some really cool stuff.
Absolutely. So, Dusty, who's he's using his wife's account, Katie Green, he says, good answer, but he was talking about the Hyundai. Um, you know, this is a situation where I think I've maybe been too giving people too much credit, but I've always said, there's companies like LG who make batteries and these car companies who make cars. They're going to figure this out. But you hear about the Bolt recall where there's tons of batteries catching fire and they've limited charging to some percent. Other cars have had recalls or shortages and stuff. Um, the reality is, I think for the Hyundai Ioniq 5 and their claimed charging speeds and stuff, I think they have a lot to prove for me because I'm thinking, well, you're not making battery. You're not Tesla with a gigafactory. You're buying them from somebody. How good are they or what do they do? You're new to this. You don't make that many electric vehicles yet. The Kona had issues, I remember, if I remember correctly. So I think they all have a fair bit to prove to consumers, I think.
James Paul asked, "Do you think the Powerwalls will use LFP batteries?" I don't. I think they're going to use whatever they're manufacturing right now. Um, Maybe in different markets they would switch it up, but
And they were going to, right? At Battery Day.
what you cut out there at the beginning, what did you say?
I was saying they did mention at Battery Day that they were going to use LFP, didn't they?
For the Powerwall?
Hmm.
I don't remember that.
Like for stationary storage or something.
They might have been talking more about the mega packs
True.
because I for the Powerwalls, I just don't see that happening because you get lower capacities in the same amount
Hmm.
of space, and those are very small packs. So it's like I would wonder if they would actually do that.
Especially if they're getting really good life cycles with
With what
what they
they've
have
got.
now.
Yeah.
Thank you, John Check, for your super chat. He says to charge over 11 kilowatts at your house, you would have to have over a 200 amp service panel, and most homes don't have that. That's very true. My car, I can charge at around 8, I think, 8 or 9. But yeah, to get really high charge rates, you'd have to have a equally sized service panel. James Paul says GM's handling of the Bolt battery issue is very disappointing, may hurt
Mm.
sales of new models due to lack of confidence, which is a real shame. And I agree with you. They can't catch a break. I feel like they're trying, but just it's been
They're
tough.
shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah. So Pure Vita says, and I this is true. He says that you'd be surprised houses in Arizona have been being built with 300 amp panels for over 20 years. This is true because in Arizona, it can be like 120 degrees outside, and your air conditioning might be running nonstop. And I know homes that are on the bigger side in Arizona that have two central air conditioning units, like one for upstairs, one for downstairs. So you might be pulling, you know, 5 kilowatts just from your air conditioning, or sorry, 10 kilowatts just from air conditioning. So this is very much true.
The house live in right now, when I moved into it, had 100 amps.
Yeah, I did too. I had
Yeah,
100. I upgraded to 200.
I had to upgrade it to 200.
James, I think James Paul just cracked our energy problems. He says, or just get a really thick extension cord and steal neighbors' power at 11 kilowatts.
There you
I had
go.
not thought of that, but I kind of love it.
Get out your black sweatpants and black shirt, run next door. And I agree with Mike. Arizona should up the rules on insulation. There's no reason that you can't insulate the hell out of your houses and get much better performance. There's no reason you actually need 300 amps. You could get away with less.
Cheap electricity. It, they have the luxury of being inefficient that you and I don't with our prices.
That still makes me sad.
It's a shame. I know. I agree.
I love in the comments that the Bong Hollywood and I can't remember who else it is. They're having this great conversation back and forth about sizing up homes and energy needs. And
Yeah, David and Bong Hollywood, I think you guys need to catch up and chat. Uh, Christian Richard has a question. I believe he's talking about wind turbines. He says thoughts on bladeless turbines or vertical turbines.
oh yeah,
You're shaking your head because I think you probably had the same idea that I did.
I got a video coming up on it.
I've got one as well. I was I was on vacation, tropical place where there's like breeze coming from the ocean 24/7. And you wouldn't want like a wind turbine, but
No.
imagine if you had a vertical turbine every so many feet with like a little light on top. It was just a little lamp post or something. And you'd be making electricity all day, literally 24/7, and you would barely even know that anything was there. Safer on birds. So winner. I think you guys gotta stay tuned for.
Yeah.
I have a feeling Matt will beat me to it, so Matt
Yeah.
should have that one next.
It's probably gonna be out in I think 2 weeks. 2 weeks, I think. But yeah, there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in the non-gigantic blade spinning turbines that are really cool and have so much promise for not even just like office buildings, but for your home, for your house, for pretty much everywhere. There's some really cool stuff happening. Yeah. And one of them is this. the shaking pole ones. Those are hysterical to me. It's like they're really cool, but they're also just really goofy looking. Just this pole that just wiggles because it's
Yeah,
the vortex turbine. It's like, wow, that's,
vortex shedding, yeah.
yeah.
Are they quiet? Beach Crow says. That's a good question. I don't know if they're quiet.
Some of them, none of them are quiet, quiet. You're gonna hear them all, but some of them are definitely pretty quiet.
Bong Hollywood says there's one they plan installing near freeways where the car's movement would just trigger them. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
the YouTube channel Just Have a Think had a great video on that exact thing, where David broke it down, and it's a really cool technology. And the fact that it's using the wind generated by the cars that are going by, it's like genius. It's like that is so genius. Hey James, could you post a link to what the video is you're talking about? Be curious to see that. He said
Yeah.
the high efficiency backyard farming operation where the owner created mini turbines that need minimal wind. I'd be curious to see what that is. Thanks for the
Shout out to get.
yeah, to Gary. Thank you for the super chat, Gary. So what does he say? Alanis Morissette should show bomb SNL and duet with Miley in a send up of ironic. Hey Robert, that's really late. It's 3 a.m. here. My first live watched. Thank you for
Thank you,
staying up,
Robert.
but wow, that is I'm sorry. Thanks for joining us.
I was up at 3 a.m. yesterday, and I know how that feels, so we really appreciate you.
We're
Yeah,
nearing that time.
the
Any other comments you want to call out?
no, I think your video on the vortex shedding wind turbines are going to be very popular because there's a lot of comments about it, and just generally, I this last week I just kept thinking about them, and I wouldn't be surprised if I mean they don't make as much as the big turbines you're thinking of,
Yeah.
so it'd have to be like you replace one of those with 10 of these or 15 of these. But I can't wait to see what undecided Matt Farrell has to say about him in a video near you.
Yeah. Stay tuned.
And don't forget to watch Elon on SNL.
Yeah, definitely tune into SNL. That's gonna be fun to watch. Whoops. As I screw up everything. Okay, but anyway, SNL's gonna be very fun to watch. But thanks for watching, everybody. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. We're live every Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. And as always, you can listen to the podcast version on the go at viceversa.show. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you in the next one.